Haha, folks, thank you for listening. This is going to be I don't know how quick it's going to be, but this is going to hurt a little bit, folks. This is a little personal. I am a huge Kennedy assassination buff. I know a lot about it. I enjoyed for many years researching, discussing, talking, all kinds of things I've read. I couldn't tell you how many books I've read. I couldn't tell you how many documentaries I've seen. I've sat through Jim Fetzer's crap. I've sat through every imaginable Kennedy conspiracy theory thing I've basically sat through, or I have read, or I've tried to. I just reviewed the movie. I just got done watching the 8-episode 11/22/63. It stars James Franco and Chris Cooper. The whole show is the basic premises is that James Franco goes back in time to 1960 to stop the Kennedy assassination that happens, of course, at 11/22/63. The time machine won't allow him to go any further into time or any closer into time, just to 1960. And every time he goes into the time machine, it resets itself. So he goes into the time machine. I won't go into too much detail. I mean, if you can't get past the time machine element, then the show's not for you. If you can't suspend that disbelief, it's not really that important. This show felt to me like propaganda. If this is the mainstream view of the Kennedy assassination after 54 years, God help this country, because we are fucked. So he goes back 1963, and this is where the show starts to get. The show looks great. First of all, looks fantastic. It's colorful. They use some CGI that's excellent. They use some models that are great. Some of the acting is really good. Some of the script is good. They, however, base the whole entire conspiracy on George de Mohrenschildt. Now, if you know anything about George de Mohrenschildt committed suicide in 1977, the day before he was supposed to go to the House on American Activities, or House on Assassinations Committee, give testimony. Of course, he was suicided. I don't think he killed himself. Or he was told to kill himself. Many people think he was murdered. They point that out, but they don't. So James Franco knows all about the Kennedy assassination. And he knows all about the whole point of him going back into the past to stop the Kennedy assassination is because Kennedy would have never gone into Vietnam. That's what Chris Cooper's character keeps telling him, and a lot of good boys wouldn't have died, and the Vietnam War would have never happened, and that's why he's got to go back and kill Lee Harvey Oswald, or at least find out if Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, and then stop the assassination of Kennedy. Now this, so he goes back into time in 1960. The time machine won't allow him to go any deeper into time or closer into time. So he goes in 1960, and he has to. Of course, he gets a job. There's details they give him. There's little things that he has to do, like he has to get a job and that kind of stuff. He makes up documents. Chris Cooper gives him documents and sets him up so he can, because Chris Cooper's apparently done this a bunch of times. Chris Cooper's character. Now he's of course dying of cancer. They don't explain how he got cancer or anything like that, but I don't think it matters. The show then gets into what I consider some of they get into emotional stuff and relationships, but really the whole point was JFK was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. And they leave out so much stuff, it was unbelievable. There is enough information on the Kennedy assassination that the official story can be blown out of the water very easily, the Warren Commission. And in fact, the House on Assassinations, the United States government, has two versions. One is the Warren Commission, Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, and two is there is a likely plot. There was another gunman, a likely conspiracy in the killing of John Kennedy. That's the United States government's official story, but that's ignored completely, of course. So they don't ever, which was shocking to me, go to New Orleans. Now, New Orleans is where Lee Harvey Oswald is from. That's where David Ferrie is, CIA. That's where Clay Shaw is, CIA. That's where Guy Bannister was, FBI agent, probably CIA. That's where all the gun running was going on with the Cubans and from ex-Patriot that were left over from the Bay of Pigs that were pissed off. So the CIA was using them to run guns, and they were doing it illegally without the knowledge of the United States government. And when Kennedy found out, he actually closed all the bases down and seized all the weapons. It was a big fucking deal. But they leave all that out, of course. They leave out all the CIA's activity that Kennedy was fucking with. They leave out all the intelligence community ties except for one, and that's George de Mohrenschildt. They use him as a pivot. And at the end of the day, he's not really a threat, even though they admit that the CIA told him to go meet with Oswald. Why would they do that? Why? Because he's a defector? So now Oswald, just because he's a defector, now they don't go into how he defected. He was in the Marine Corps, got let out of was allowed to go home to take care of his supposedly sick mother, was only there for, I don't know, a week. takes a boat to Russia, for Christ's sake, defects, marries Marina Oswald, who had her own Russian army intelligence connections in her family, marries her, then borrows money from the United States government after defecting. After this was a Marine who defected, who may or may not have had top secret information because he worked at a top secret radar base. He's fluent in Russian at this point. Marina Oswald thinks he's Russian. Where did he learn Russian from? They don't ever go into that. They don't show where. They don't show that he was a Marxist before he joined the Marine Corps. They supposedly called him Oswaldovich in the Marine Corps in the late 50s. It just unravels and gets stupider and stupider. They're building a legend for Oswald. That's what they're doing. That's what the CIA was doing. He borrows money from the United States government, gets back and brings his wife over, which is totally implausible in 1960 that you would ever be able to get somebody from the Soviet Union, a loved one, back over, let alone Oswald. And according to every source that you can find, any source, he was not debriefed. Nobody debriefed Oswald. Nobody did an exit interview with him with the CIA or the FBI. Supposedly, he then starts to be followed, right? When now I know for a fact that I'm pretty sure for a fact that he was talked to when he came back from the Soviet Union, but that's not been recorded or the information has been buried. I think he was a spy of some sort, and that's when it started. They bring him back, and this defector program, by the way, was something that the United States Marine Corps was involved with, the Army was involved with. This was to create spies. They would take soldiers. This is public information. Please Google it. There are people now talking about it. It's been declassified, a lot of it, and a lot of people just come out and start talking about it. So this defector program did exist. Again, they don't mention, they leave out New Orleans completely, and that's where the plot was hatched. But it only happened in Dallas. It could have happened in Chicago, it could have happened in Miami, it could have happened in Dallas. And that didn't matter which city. The plot was plotted in New Orleans with the David Ferries of the world and the Clay Shaws. Oswald didn't have one CIA handler, Georgia Marshall. He had at least 2 or 3 CIA handlers. I mean, that's a fact. Okay, so they don't mention Marina Oswald when she leaves. When she leaves her husband, she goes and stays with somebody by the name of Janet Williams. Janet Williams' family, Janet Williams' sister, is a secretary for some general in the Pentagon. And then her husband, Bill Williams, worked for Bell Helicopters, amongst other things, and had connections to the intelligence community as well. But they don't mention any of that. They don't mention any of the intelligence people that were surrounding him in Dallas. They don't mention they don't mention the Hosty. They make James Hosty, the FBI agent, benign. Like he's just following him because he's a defector and he's just harassing him because he came from the Soviet Union. They don't mention the note that Lee Harvey Oswald wrote and that Hosty burned. If it was going to show that, because everyone was claiming that he was just a nut, he was just angry, he was beating on Marina and he was awful, then why don't they keep that note to show that he was a danger, he was whatever? You maybe use it in court, maybe just use it to show he's a fucking off his hinges and he needs to be committed or whatever. But they don't keep that? And you're following him around and you don't keep all the information on him? What was in that note? Hosty claims, it was nothing, it was just a threat and he got rid of it. He was told to get rid of it. Which is, you got to ask yourself, the FBI getting rid of documents, you always got to be wary of that or anything. Also, the guy he worked with, Oswald used to, there was 3 guys, Oswald was one of them, and they would kind of alternate between vehicles because sometimes one person's car would run and another time another guy's car would run. And he drove with Oswald all the time, and he worked with Oswald. I forget his name. This is, by the way, the FBI interviewed him. This is public information. The FBI, he claims that he never saw Oswald bring any package in remotely close to the time they said that Oswald brought the gun in. Now, this show, 11/22/63, shows Oswald bringing in the package of the gun. This is completely fabricated, because the guy that rode with him every day, an alternating vehicle, said he never brought anything in remotely close to that. And the FBI brought him in and brought in a bunch of packing material and a bunch of tape. Like, he said it was unbelievable. And they had him reconstruct these packages to what they look like. And even with the gun, the Mannlicher Carcano, which was the worst shoulder weapon ever made, by the way, one of the worst, what did the Italians call it? The peaceful rifle, because it didn't kill anyone, and a plastic scope. They don't point any of that shit out. They don't point out how Oswald got the gun, that he used a mail order. So he had to give his name and his address, and basically just, instead of going into a gun shop in Texas, wouldn't even have to give ID and could have walked out with the rifle. And paid less for it. None of it makes sense. And they left all of this shit out. They even show the famous photo of Oswald holding the Mannlicher Carcano and the paper that he's serious, that he's a communist, and he's holding it. The photo that so many people think has been photoshopped, that they actually think there was this guy, Rufus somebody or other, they actually think it's him because there's a wrist injury that Oswald didn't have. You can the photo analysis looks wrong. It looks like it's been cropped. It's leaning at an odd angle. A lot of people say have claimed that's a fake photo. Now maybe it's real, but that's the only photo that connects Lee Harvey Oswald and that gun, other than the mail order that he sent, the receipt. I mean, it's ridiculous. Oh, and supposedly he went to a shooting range, but nobody can show that he used that gun at the shooting range. He just went to a shooting range. And they don't point out the stuff that he did at the shooting range, how loud he made himself. He was shooting at other people's targets. He was talking about how he was going to assassinate Kennedy. He was telegraphing it to everybody so everybody would know he was going to kill Kennedy. He was going to kill Kennedy. There was an assassination going on Kennedy. I think he was I don't know what he was. I don't know if he was part of the plot. I don't know if they were trying to make him out to be, I don't know what. I don't know if he was just a spy. I don't know if he was trying to play that right-wing shit like, oh, look, let's infiltrate the right wing in Dallas, or he was being manipulated by them. And nor does this show go into any of that. Doesn't mention the John Birch Society. Doesn't mention the wanted for treason posters in the Dallas Morning News the day Kennedy was assassinated, 11/22/63. Doesn't mention any of that. Doesn't mention any of the hardcore right-wingers that were violently against Kennedy and had talked openly about killing him. Didn't talk about the FBI agent that is now, you can again Google this, an FBI agent actually infiltrated the John Birch Society, and they talked about assassinating Kennedy and how Kennedy needed to be removed. Didn't go into any of that. Didn't talk about any of that. And one of the worst things this show did, and this is why I'm going to call it propaganda, and I'm going to leave you with this thought. They made him out to be a prolific shooter. They did it subtly. They said, as Oswald is shooting Kennedy at the end, when he's in the book depository and he's ready to shoot in the show, he says, sharpshooter. And earlier in the show, he's taking apart his Mannlicher Carcano rifle and putting it back together and timing himself and saying, Marine, do it again, Marine, sharpshooter. The sharpshooter badge is not, I think every Marine gets it, whether or not you have to actually do the basic shooter. I mean, you actually have to, that's the basic one. He actually had something, and this is, again, interviewed. Mark Lane did interviews with people that were in the Marine Corps with him. And they said that he was a terrible shot. In fact, he had something called Maggie's Drawers, which is a red flag that comes up at the end of the firing range when you miss. And when it keeps coming up, it shows, and they make fun of the people who can't hit the target, and they call them, you got Maggie's Drawers. He was at best, he was a below average shooter. He was an average to below average. He was right at their minimum, the Marine Corps minimum. And they made him out to be some prolific fucking assassin. And then when he's in the book depository and he can shoot Kennedy as he's coming up Elm, and when he panics, he starts to shake. And that's why he waited till Kennedy took that weird turn onto the Dealey Plaza. It's propaganda. That is not, and I can overlook all of the dramatic interpretations, like the conversations with Marina and Lee Harvey Oswald that never happened, that they say happened, that they tried to make him out to be. I can overlook all of the other shit, but I can't overlook that you have taken so many liberties with history at this point, and then you decide that you're going to go with the company line, the Warren Commission line. We're watching a television show about time travel, and you're going with the official story that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated Kennedy by himself. For what motivation? They show in the show, he's sitting in a park, and he sees that Kennedy's coming to Dallas in a newspaper, and he looks down, and all of a sudden the music gets all dramatic, and you know what he's thinking. And he's like, my mission is to and they give you no real motivation for him to kill Kennedy. None. I can put my mind, I can do anything I want, but they don't give you any. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it was blurring and turning the assassination into fiction, and that's because that's what it ended up being. The very idea that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated John Kennedy is fiction. There is absolutely no proof of it. There was no proof he even fired the gun that day. The bullets that they even point out the bullets. They say, well, the Walker, some of the bullet, the same bullet that was used to hit Walker, the shrapnel from that is the same one that matches the ones that shot Kennedy. Really? Because the pristine bullet that they found at Parkland? How about all the doctors at Parkland Hospital that said Kennedy was shot from the front? It was in his head, back of his head was blown out. That it wasn't from the back, it was from the front. That he had exit wounds in his throat. We can go on and on and on and on and on. It's just completely, it was so John Connolly. They don't mention Connolly's. They don't mention the broken wrist. They don't mention any of the bullets. They don't mention shit. They don't mention the different trajectories. They don't mention Tegg, James Tegg, the Secret Service agent that was hit by a bullet that could not, by a bullet fragment that could not have been for anywhere near from where Lee Harvey Oswald was shooting. This is the kind of shit that fact that the last shot is the best shot, not the first shot, which is complete. The fact that you couldn't shoot anybody recycling that thing with any accuracy, and that no sharpshooter in the world has ever mimicked what Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly did that day. None of these things mattered in this stupid piece of shit 11/22/63. And I can go on and on, folks. I could literally, I'm just taking this off the top of my head. Like I haven't even done a Google search on the shit that I really could go into. This show was slap ass, it was embarrassing, and it's not for conspiracy theorists, it's for mainstream dick faces, cock smokers who are so lazy they don't even want to investigate the Kennedy assassination, and then are willing to let a love story emotionally manipulate them to convince them that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin. So what? So you don't blame the CIA or the military-industrial complex, or you don't blame the government? What? I mean, I don't get the point. Why lie? Why make all this shit up? Why completely change? You just omit so much stuff, and then we're doing a show about time travel, for fuck's sake. Fucking show, go conspiracy retard. What the why not? It would have made a way more entertaining show, and it would have been true. Thank you for listening. And 11/22/63, summation, out of 10, 4 out of 10 at best. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, it's probably a 2 out of 10. And I'm sure somebody needs to find Leno Sanik or Jim DiEugenio or any of the other JFK researchers out there. They're probably on suicide watch right now, because this was bad even for Hollywood. And this felt like propaganda, and to make him the shooter and then to completely ridiculous. Don't waste your time. Thank you for listening.